The wayfinding landscape is changing, so welcome to Endpoint's Wayfinding Xchange Podcast. We want to connect with leading experts, tech innovators, and key contributors to exchange knowledge and innovation in physical and digital wayfinding. We want to shape the future of wayfinding through discussion, collaboration, and shared expertise. And this is why we have created this podcast series. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome to another episode of our Wayfinding Xchange Podcast, this time with me, Alison Richings, Wayfinding Design Director at Endpoint. Over the past 25 years, Endpoint has witnessed some truly remarkable changes in the world of sustainability. It's been an incredible journey, and I have to say, it isn't just a buzzword, it's woven into the fabric of our business. Lately, we've been on an exciting quest. We're exploring how to seamlessly blend highly sustainable materials into our product design without compromising on quality or efficiency. It's a challenge when signs are built to last 5 to 15 years. Today, I'm thrilled to sit down with Ryan Little, a sustainable packaging designer and freelance with the Magical Mushroom Company. Ryan and his team are doing something truly revolutionary. They're creating packaging on an industrial scale by tapping into the natural flexibility and strengths of mycelium. That's mushrooms to us. We've been working with Ryan on our quest to use revolutionary materials for signed products. Ryan, welcome, and I can't wait to dig into this topic with you.
Thank you for having me.
Could you share your background and your journey into sustainable packaging design?
Yeah, so I started at 16. I did a young apprenticeship and worked in the world of architecture. It was a popular choice at the time with kids my age trying to get into the world of building and stuff like that. I did my ONC in building studies and sort of went through, I spent 13 years working for a architectural practice in North Yorkshire where quite a lot of the work you sort of pour your heart and soul into doesn't ever come to anything. And I decided I wanted to go into something which was a little bit more fast moving. And I went and worked for a manufacturer in Leeds who makes stuff out of steel. And it went from sort of spending months and months and months on a drawing and then it never happening to working on a drawing in the morning and it being made in the afternoon. And that's how sort of everything went forward. While I was there, I met a guy called Paul Gilligan who went on to found the Magical Mushroom Company. And I'd worked with him on various different design projects. And when he needed some packaging designing, he picked up the phone and we got involved from there.
Amazing. I mean, I think something really interesting about going from architecture into packaging because of the architectural sort of qualities that packaging requires.
Yeah.
And I love the idea of speed. We work on lots of projects that either don't happen or take years to come to fruition.
I think there's also the bit sort of when you get involved in the world of architecture to begin with, if you've got anything about you that is in any way environmentally friendly, you try and push that in the sort of construction industry that you're in. And often, you know, when you come away from university, you get involved in commercial architecture and there's not really an opportunity to do eco-friendly stuff. And when the subject of eco-friendly packaging came up, I suddenly had an opportunity again to do something realistic that was eco-friendly and actually do something proper in the world where instead of it just being a nice idea on paper that one day we'll forgot about or costed out, it's something that is intrinsic in the design work that we do.
I think that's really amazing. So obviously the packaging with Magical Mushroom is all about mycelium, and I think everyone will be really interested to understand what that is.
So mycelium is the root structure that happens underneath the mushroom before the mushroom pops up. We always refer to it as growing, but in actual fact, nothing actually gets any bigger in the sense of the word growing. What we do is we take agricultural waste. It's sort of impregnated with mycelium from the outset, and then we leave it in an environment that it considers perfect for its own growth, where it sort of binds itself together. It doesn't get any bigger, but it turns from, you know, sort of a powdery waste product into a solid form, which we've designed, which can be used as packaging.
Why mycelium? What made you think about
Well, I think it was more the Magical Mushroom team. They didn't want to go into the world of packaging and explore different routes. They saw a company in the States called Ecovative. They pioneered the technology that Magical Mushroom Company now use to make the packaging and thought, this is an amazing material. Let's see if we can build on what they've already done. So we all went across to New York, not the the cool New York you see on TV, some industrial estate, 4 hours out of the cool bit. We learned from there how they were doing things, what we thought we needed to change when we came back to the UK. And from there, they've massively industrialized the process of making the packaging out of the mycelium. The mycelium bit it's amazing on its own, but the thing that makes it work is making it industrially scalable, because as with all these things, it's great as a hobby or a pastime if you just want to grow a tiny little bit of mycelium in your bedroom or whatever, but trying to make it commercially viable so that you can go on and make a big change with it, you've got to get it working commercially, and that's what Magical Mushroom have been able to do. Their mission is getting rid of polystyrene in the world of packaging. That would only work if it works commercially.
Yeah.
We can't afford to just sort of do it as a charity thing. We'll get rid of all your polystyrene, but it's going to cost us to do it. It's got to work commercially, and that's exactly what they're doing.
And what have been the biggest challenges around making it work commercially? Is it about the process of getting the mycelium to grow and mold into certain shapes? Is it about the structural integrity of it? I imagine that a lot of the people who might use the packaging would say, well, what if the delivery person drops it on the floor 12 times? It's still got to be structurally sound. Where are the biggest challenges in your process?
I think, to be totally honest, the sort of the packaging design element is not the greatest thing to overcome. The material behaves in a very similar way to a polystyrene. So you can almost design as though you're going to make something out of polystyrene. The thing that causes the biggest upset probably comes down to price. We get a lot of clients through the door who, on the first intro call, will tell you how incredibly green focused they are and how they want to do things environmentally friendly. And then you sort of go back to them with a price, and if it's 5% more than what they were currently paying, they're suddenly not the eco warrior they came across as to begin with. So I think that is probably the biggest hurdle.
I can totally see that, because I guess packaging is one very small part of the product cost.
It's a part that essentially just gets thrown away. So it's not like people sort of give it any value of its own, because they're literally planning on sending it somewhere so someone else can throw it in the bin, and that's it.
But what I do love about mycelium is the story of what happens to it instead of throwing it in the bin. So the idea that your product arrives, you get the packaging, and then you can compost it back down yourself.
Yeah. So as opposed to some of the other products out there that we see the word compostable written on, we've got a material that when it comes into your house, you can literally sort of crush it down with your hands, either throw it in your food waste, which is a pretty great way of getting rid of it if you've got a food waste bin. If not, if you've got a garden or a compost heap, even better, you can break it up, just sort of powder it up with your fingers and throw it into the garden. And it literally does just disappear within a couple of weeks. I think we've had stories of people who are Olympic level composters who have had it disappearing in overnight almost.
Great. So competitive, how quickly can we get rid of it stories?
Almost,
I love that.
And it's great like that. The other thing, of course, is at the end of its life, as whatever packaging it's been, it can also be reused back through the process again. It can sort of be impregnated with mycelium and start again. It can just disappear at the end of its life. And I think that's the champion part of the material.
I think it's truly incredible. I think it's really interesting. I mean, it's got the most amazing finish. It's like, I don't even know how you describe it. It's like a rabbit's ear. That sounds weird, but it's got a really nice feel to it. It feels like the texture's nice.
Yeah, it's super soft.
Yeah. So could you tell me a little bit about the process of creating and making mycelium packaging, mushroom packaging?
Yeah, of course. So essentially what we do is we place our mixture of mycelium and agricultural waste into a mould in the same way that I often liken it to a sandcastle. We sort of take a material which is very particulate, it's almost runny. We push it into a mould, we sort of smooth it on the top in the same way you do with the sandcastle, and then we leave it. And when we leave it, the mycelium in there, this is the bit we would refer to as growing. It doesn't get any bigger, but it binds the whole thing together. And then after a given amount of time, we turn the thing over, pat it on top in the same way that you do at sandcastle. And when you remove the mould, what you're left with is basically a sort of a solidified version of the shape you've designed or the shape I've designed. From there, it goes back into the growth pod. It grows for a little bit longer, and that's where we get that beautiful, smooth, fluffy rabbit's ear coating on the outside.
So it's not really rabbit's ears.
No, it's not made out of rabbit's ears. We wouldn't do anything so horrible. And yeah, sort of after that process, it's put in a kiln where it's dried out. That both gets rid of all the moisture in it during the growth process. It's quite a humid sort of scenario. And it also renders it inert so that the mycelium stops growing and it's no longer the organism it started as. I think one of the main concerns with people who have not worked with it before is that they think it's going to somehow become damp and spring back to life again and start taking over the world. We got a lot of sort of interesting questions after the TV show The Last of Us aired. People thought mycelium was going to take over the world. They saw it on the TV show of it making people into zombies, and on a lot of calls, people were suddenly concerned that what if the packaging gets wet? Like they thought it was going to spring back to life and start eating them. But no, it's not. It's a sort of body snatchers scenario because it will sort of take over organic material and it does it very well, but it doesn't do it in a violent sort of manner.
How long does that process take?
Generally, the process sort of from filling the mould in the first place to it being overgrown and getting the furry coat to coming out of the kiln at the end is generally about a week, and we can make as many as we've got moulds for during that week. So if you wanted 1,000 parts, we could spread it out over 10 weeks or we could do it over 1 week. It just depends how many moulds we need to do the process.
And what about the tooling up stages? Because obviously there's work in getting the moulds together and making sure they're moulded in the right way.
To get the tooling up and running, normally there's a bit of design time. That's normally a couple of weeks. And then we go through a prototyping process where we get, like a one-off of the part you want. That might be 3 or 4 weeks. And then going into sort of upscaling that into the world of sort of real life commercial mould making, that might be another 3 or 4 weeks. And then from there, depending on how many moulds we make, we can produce that many parts per growth period.
How long would mycelium last if you weren't using it for packaging? So if we did want to stick it on the wall and use it as temporary festival signs, what's our best length of time that we might get out of them?
I think when we started using the material we got from Ecovative in the States and all their data sheets, we're told a lifespan of something like 25 years in a sort of ordinary dry environment, indoors. I've got a piece that I've had for probably 6 years and I've sort of doused it in alcohol and oil and perfume and all number of things. I've tried to set fire to it and it almost looks in the same condition as it did when I got it in the first place. I think as long as it's in a pleasant environment, a normal day-to-day household sort of environment or shop or, inside where it's dry, it's absolutely fine. The sort of the magic of it biodegrading in the way that it does happens when it's introduced to the environment that is like compost. So you break it down, you put it in, mix it in with the compost, and it very, very quickly disappears.
And what about maintenance? So if we were to go, well, actually, we know it can last a fairly decent amount of time and we wanted to use it as a sign base, but it's, it's in a nice indoor environment, but it's a public place and we want to clean it and make sure that it's kept nice. Can we do that?
Yeah, I think the people who have used the material to make products, I think generally speaking, it's sort of a look after it with a damp cloth, sort of dust it in the same way you would anything else around the home. We've had a couple of clients who've been making sort of shop fittings and that sort of thing with it and have waxed the surface of the material in, like a beeswax or a sort of thing you would normally do with furniture, which gives it a little bit more of a, not glossy, but a more wipeable surface. Yeah. It's not a good sound, is it?
But we have to worry about these things when it comes to signs.
Oh, we do, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
We have members of the public with sticky fingers. Can you talk about any examples where you've delivered the solutions for your clients and what those outcomes have been like?
A good example would be we've been doing some work with a company called BA Components who make kitchen cabinets. They have they used to use a moulded polystyrene corner piece to protect their, the fine edges of the cabinet doors when they left the factory. We managed to make a like-for-like component which was the same cost as the polystyrene that they were using, which means they could make a sort of direct swap over. And today, I think we're up into the millions of parts that have been replaced with the magical mushroom material, the mushroom packaging, instead of using the polystyrene. So that's a good commercial example of millions of bits of polystyrene that were going to come into existence that now haven't.
I mean, I think that's sort of mind-blowing, really, because I think people are talking more and more about mycelium, but I do think that people still see it as a bit of a, isn't it one of those buzz things that people are talking about, and it's not really that great and we'll just carry on as we are. But in actual fact, it's a real world solution.
Yeah, quite a lot of what we do isn't the sort of the romantic picture that you see on Instagram of what people are doing with mycelium. It's the boring white goods, but that's what turns up at your house every time you buy a fridge or a washing machine or a dishwasher. It's all surrounded with polystyrene, and that's a big piece of polystyrene, and that's the bit we're trying to get rid of.
But I think that's what's really innovative about it, because as you say, there is this romantic notion and it's all like fancy high-end perfume packaging, but actually where it makes the biggest difference are in places that people don't immediately think of when you talk about getting rid of polystyrene. And that's what's really interesting about it. How are you using it outside of packaging? I mean, obviously we've started to reach out and talk about, could we use it in sign design? So when we put a sign on the wall, instead of using some plastic, could we use mycelium? Could we grow a sign panel? And then there's a lot of potential in that, but there's also a lot of issues. How do you print onto it, etc.? How do you make it last within the space? All sorts of things. But for us, we think it's like a really fascinating thing to try to work out and do. Have there been any other, what might seem to be a bit left field, people that have come to you and said, can we use your mushroom to do X?
Yeah, I think we get approached quite a lot with people who don't want packaging. It's not always the best fit. I think that's one of the things that Magical Mushroom are a packaging company, and that's what we're looking to do. A couple of years ago, I sort of set up a little brand of my own called Funguy, obviously the punchline to the joke.
Obviously.
Well, the domain was available. I thought I'd go with it. And sort of from there, I've been taking some of the more niche parts, like when Endpoint got in touch, looking at making some signage. And I think there's a lot of opportunities for places that are not necessarily in high footfall area, where the decomposing nature of the material is going to cause a disadvantage to what the part is. But outside of that, I think there's quite a lot of opportunities in the world of architecture, maybe interiors and temporary structures, temporary signage, anything that doesn't need to be there for a very long time. I almost feel like there's more of an opportunity to use a material that has almost a lifespan that matches the job that it's supposed to be doing. Aluminium signage for a festival, for example, would seem ridiculous. Printing it on something that will last for 100 years, it's never going to get used more than once. And I think that seems like a real pleasant fit to me, is making something supernatural. You can put it in a field, it does its job for a while, and you could almost leave it there and let it deteriorate in the way that it's been doing for millions of years and going back to the world.
I think that's what's really key about it. Do you notice any hesitation amongst clients? Do clients come to you because they know it's the right thing to do? They need to be sustainable. They need to be looking at different ways to be sustainable. But are there any kind of things where they're concerned about how it might work for them, apart from money, which we obviously talked about?
Something that we've had a lot of phone calls from people who already think it's a sort of legitimate material from a sort of sheet material point of view. They just want to ring up and go, I've just heard about mycelium on LinkedIn. Can you just make me this thing I've been buying for years from someone else out of your material? And whilst the sort of the technology, the ecosystem of mycelium has been around for millennia, we've only just started making it commercially consistent, shall we say. I think that's going to be the main tripping point. We get a lot of people ringing up who might want a pretty simple shape making, and we go through the motions of saying, yes, we can do that. And then they want to know the exact fire rating. Where does it fall in part B? You kind of go, actually, we only use it at the moment for packaging.
Yeah.
I'm sure we could take it through that, but almost by that point in the conversation, the phone's hung up and they've sort of fallen out of love with it. And I think it's just a case of, it will get there. I'm working with a company at the moment called Operate, who are building off the back of what Magical Mushroom Company have been doing, tweaking the recipe that goes into the myco-composite and trying to make a more fire retardant version of the stuff we're already using at Magical Mushroom. And I think that's where we'll be going. Certainly, I've already discussed the signage we've been looking at with Endpoint, trying to get that into a more regulatory form as opposed to just taking the packaging stuff and tweaking it. But that's what any industry needs. We've started off with one thing and it needs building on and building on and building on, and then sort of fine tuning for where else it's going. I think the world of interiors is a huge opportunity, and that's what we're looking at doing.
And do you think that's the next place then for mycelium, is that we go from packaging into interiors? Where else do we go? Is it just infinite, really?
I think it's just a material.
Yeah.
So anything you need a material for, you could probably use this for. But it's obviously very transient in its nature. Yeah. So it's not an appropriate material for lots of different jobs, and it is an appropriate material for a lot of other stuff. We've used it for a lot of visual merchandising in stores, because that stuff, it only hangs around for a very short period of time, and then typically it sort of, gets watered down and passed around stores, but eventually it just goes to the bin because no one needs something that's so specific.
Yeah.
Whereas if the last, moment of its use, it can just go back into the ground, or it can go into compost, or it can go to food waste, then it's almost continuing to do a little bit of worth.
And I wanted to ask as well, going a bit off-piste, I've only ever seen mycelium in that light colour. Is there a way of changing the colour? And can we vary how textured things are and things like that?
At the moment, the substrate that we use to make the material out of is a particular agricultural byproduct or agricultural waste product. And we can vary the size of the particles that we use. But the main one that we use the tons and tons and tons of is just a particular shape and size, and that's because we use it for packaging. We can't just randomly get hold of lots of different variations, although a lot of different variations can be used. We don't use other ones. I think moving forward, we'll have the opportunity to use different materials, which will slightly affect the finish. However, my understanding of it is the sort of genus of mushroom that you use in the first place controls what the mycelium looks like. And the one that we use always puts out that same colour material.
Yeah.
Now, in my sort of almost personal CPD lifestyle, when I started doing work for myself with fungi, I sort of put aside one day a month and I would get in touch with, I'd go onto Instagram, put in mycelium, and the first 10 companies that came up, or the first 10 good-looking pictures that came up, I'd send them a little message, ask them what they were doing and see if they'd be willing to have a chat with me. And since then, I've spoken to people all over the world who are using, different strains of mushroom that are producing blue mycelium or red or yellow, or ones that change under different lighting conditions and things like that, which has not been immediately useful, but I sort of know it happens now. And when I speak to other people at the other side of the world who say, it's a shame we can't do one in blue, I can kind of go, actually, I spoke to someone last week who can. And then I put the two people together, and that feels like a nice little, trying to make the world of myco people talk to each other.
I love that. I love the fact that it's dependent on the genus of mushroom. And if you can use a different type of mushroom, you potentially can get a different colour. And I think that is really interesting.
Yeah.
But it's still at really early stages and is still quite an innovative thing. So I don't think that anyone that calls you up tomorrow and says, right, I heard you can do blue.
Yeah.
I just want all my packaging to be in blue.
Yeah, I think
they might be a little bit upset.
Yeah, I think part of the scenario and the reason that we use the particular mushroom route that we do is that it also does all the other wonderful bits. It's quite water repellent and so on. It's quite elastic. It works quite well for packaging. And I'm sure there's lots of different mushrooms out there we could be using, but they would probably hinder the job of packaging.
Yeah. So it's the thing of, well, we're trying to do this and therefore we use this type of mushroom. Yeah. If we were trying to do that, that might be better.
That's right.
However, we've got to compromise on one thing to make the thing that we're working at work. Have you got any advice or anything that you might help clients who are looking to use mycelium? So before they even pick up the phone to you or drop you a note, Is there anything that they should think about?
I would say, is there something else that will do it better? I deal with quite a lot of people who have seen that mycelium is a bit of a buzzword and want to use it, or you want to use mushroom packaging in a manner that's not necessarily the best fit for the project. And we sort of explain that, and it doesn't always go down fantastically, but you've got to be practical about these things. But I would say, just do pick up the phone, get in touch, and I will help you out where I can, point you in the right direction. I don't pretend to be an expert in the world of mycelium, but I've done an awful lot of moulding of micro-composites into things, and I can sort of tell you where the pitfalls might be with the projects you're working on. I'm working with a company at the moment in America who are trying to make a bottle out of mycelium.
I would have thought that's really difficult because of the water.
It's
because the liquid.
It has a huge number of pitfalls, and they're a startup who came out of university and I think very optimistically just sent us a drawing of a bottle and said, could you just give us a quote for making this bottle? And we're like, there is no way of making this using any of the technology that's out there that's not insanely labour intensive. But we now sort of have a scheduled weekly meeting, and we just sort of sit down and we go through what they've been working on, what they've tried this week, more from just a sense check and a sort of the commercial, my manufacturing background kind of going, that seems like a good idea. You should probably look at that, compared to them sort of just going, we had an idea which was this. And I go, well, I think that's probably beyond what anyone's capable of at the moment, but trying to stay positive and keep them moving, because I'm very positive for them that they'll get to what they're aiming for.
From your personal perspective, in 20 years' time, let's go mad, 30 years' time, what would you like to see happen? Would your greatest moment be that everything that arrives at your house is wrapped in one of these types of products and that you never see polystyrene practically ever again?
I think that would be the long-term goal. I think it would be the eradication seems like a bit of an extreme term, but only using polystyrene where it's a real benefit to the job it's doing. At the moment, just using it for packaging on millions of products the world over, because it's very cheap, seems like a close-minded way of doing something. And I think if we can get more people involved in just using different things, not even using mycelium or mushroom packaging, just using an appropriate type of packaging for the job that needs doing, we can probably get away with making a lot less polystyrene and a lot less pollution as a result.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant aim. Generally, I think it's absolutely fascinating. And I think the enormity of how much polystyrene is in the world, and even if you took 2% or 1% of that away, it would make an enormous difference. Yeah. I don't think that we think about it. Things arrive, you unpackage it, you stick the polystyrene in the bin, and you don't for 1 minute go, it's a bad product. And actually there are people out there who are prepared to think about how we could do that differently, and that it is so widely used. Because you just think about yourself and the one thing that you bought. It makes such a massive difference thinking about those things.
Yeah, and it's what people do with the polystyrene when they get it in their houses. Yeah. I bought a new fridge recently. This is a real story. And, top and bottom and all four sides had like a 10 mil sheet of polystyrene all over. I didn't really know what to do with it. You can't put it in your normal recycling, and it's 7 foot tall or whatever it was. So now it's just sort of kicking around my garage. Yeah. And whilst I'm trying to think of a thing it can be used for, can I use it to insulate my greenhouse? I don't know what to do with it.
But I think that's the thing, because you know the other side of it. For you, that's even more of a challenge. I mean, you must have seen the people delivering the fridge, and you must have just put your head in your hands and gone, oh my God.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So whereas I, until we had this conversation, could have quite easily just taken that polystyrene to the tip and gone, I didn't think anything of it. Thank you so much for talking to me today. I have to say, it's completely fascinating. It blows my mind. I love the practical yet really innovative nature of what you do. And how would people get in contact with you if they wanted to find out more?
Well, if you want to find out more about mushroom packaging, if you go to magicalmushroom.com, or if you want to get in touch with me directly, if you want to go to Funguy, spelled funguy.co.uk, you can get through to me directly.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Thank you for listening to our latest Wayfinding Xchange podcast. Stay tuned for further episodes and feel free to contact us with any questions and suggestions for future episodes.